And then,
Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Rich Life Podcast. This is Dr. Poe, and I'm here with my co host, Lane Kawoka. Today, we thought that we would talk about a health related topic. And the topic that we're going to talk about is how the right sports and physical activities might help you live longer. Regular exercise is one of the most powerful tools that we have. But as you can imagine, not all forms of exercise offer the same benefits. A recent paper in the British Journal of Sports Medicine talks about how certain types of sports are more strongly associated with increased life expectancy and decreased mortality. Getting the most bang for a buck in terms of our time and figuring out what works best when it comes to the research.
yeah, I think we'll get into what those sports are in a bit. But I think a lot of us have heard about the correlation between longevity is
Yeah.
basically your lung capacity, the VO2 max measure.
Yeah, there's VO2 max, and then there's also heart rate variability. If you do a little bit of activity and your heart rate really spikes through the roof, it might mean that there's some work to do there to improve that.
So that's something I was always wondering is like a lot of these studies that they have, you probably know how they put them together better than I do. If it's more like causation or correlation, obviously people who, go to sleep before 2 a.m. because they're out drinking and smoking and partying aren't going to live as long as people who do go to sleep before 2 a.m. Just like those people who actually work out and tend to have a higher VO2 max are going to live longer.
The study we're referencing is one that they did in England and Scotland, and they looked at a lot of people, 80,000 adults in England and Scotland who participated in these surveys between 1994 and 2008. Right? So period of basically 14 years, and participants were asked about their recent physical activities and then tracked on average for 9 years. During that time, almost 8,800 people died.
And 10% of them
Yeah,
died.
yeah.
They never said how old these participants are. When you have people over their 40s, guarantee a bunch of them are gonna.
Yeah. So they got a lot of data from this. And after adjusting for factors such as age, gender, smoking, socioeconomic status, and other lifestyle habits, the researchers found pretty interesting differences based on the types of exercises that people do. Let's get into what they found. I think that's what people are really interested in. Talk about why certain sports and activities are associated with greater life expectancy and lower overall mortality. The researchers found that these types of sports associated with the greatest reduction in all-cause mortality was actually racket sports. Right? So something like tennis, badminton, squash, table tennis. It's pretty remarkable. So after adjusting for all these other factors like age, smoking, gender, they found that if you regularly play racket sports, you have a 47% lower risk of death. 47%. That's massive. Second highest was swimming. That was associated with a 28% lower risk of death, followed closely by activities such as aerobics, like a gymnastics class, or even dance classes. That was associated with 27% lower risk of death. Again, these are pretty significant numbers. Right? After that was cycling. That was associated with 15% lower risk of death. Interestingly, you might notice that we didn't mention running or jogging. Didn't correlate with any decrease in all-cause mortality after adjusting for other lifestyle factors. I found very interesting because you see a lot of people out there running. A lot of people, they'll do these couch to 5K programs. A lot of people might build up to 10K, half marathon, marathon, right? So what is true that is that runners tend to be very healthy people to begin with. Right? They found that runners overall have a much lower rate of premature death. They tend to be pretty healthy people in general. However, that's a correlation. These people tend to be healthy and tend to have good dietary, better sleep habits, and just better overall exercise habits than the general population. However,
So the people who jog and run tend to be a little bit more diehards if you talk about that spectrum.
But in and of itself, that activity alone does not seem to confer any significant benefit in terms of your overall mortality. Yeah. So let's talk about why we mentioned that racket sports came in overwhelmingly as the number one type of activity that's associated with like lower risk of overall death. That begs the question, like, why are racket sports so effective? A couple possible reasons. One is that unless you're hitting against a wall, you're usually playing tennis with somebody, right? Whether it's singles or doubles. There's an element of social connection, right? We know that social engagement, it's a pretty powerful predictor of longer life, right? We know that people who are generally alone, without friends, have a greater chance of premature death and their life expectancy tends to be lower.
Well,
Number two,
also, it's a community thing, right? It's a community, you're playing it there. But I would also probably say it's a lot easier, like golf, right? You can pretty much play some of these racket sports with a beer in one hand or smoking a cigar. You can't necessarily do that swimming or running or playing football or soccer. So I think the thing is just keep at it, right? Whatever it is, keep at it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I personally prefer playing singles tennis just because it's a much better workout. Some people prefer doubles because you don't have to run around as much. And there's probably more of a social component. So going after social connection, the researchers speculated that racket sports, if you're playing it at at least a moderately vigorous level, it usually involves short bursts of intense movement followed by recovery periods. If you think about it, that's actually pretty similar to high intensity interval training or HIIT, which has been shown to improve heart health and metabolic function. Just by the nature of the sport, a lot of stop and go is pretty beneficial to your health.
Yeah, it's the randomization of your heart rate and your work cycles
Yeah.
different than like CrossFit, or I know you do a lot of these with your running. The running's I think running's boring, so I know you
Yeah.
have all these kinds of ways to keep it interesting
Yeah.
and change it up.
Yeah, and fortunately, I enjoy racket sports too. I think after coming across this study, I'm actually making a more intentional effort to keep incorporating racket sports into my exercise routine. Yeah. So the third reason that they think racket sports might be so effective in your life expectancy is that racket sports typically require a lot of quick thinking, requires coordination. There's strategy involved, right? If you just think about all the things your brain has to do when you're on a tennis court, you got to think about spacing. You got to think about where you're going to hit the ball next. You have to anticipate where your opponent's going to be. A lot of strategy involved, like a lot of quick decisions that you have to make on the fly. You also got to make adjustments during the middle of a match. So it really engages all these different parts of your brain, right? In addition to important things like your balance and your visual tracking. That takes a lot of brain power on top of the actual physical exercise that you're engaging in. This is why they think racket sports are very effective in reducing your risk of cognitive decline as you get older. The fourth reason they think racket sports are so effective is that unlike something like running, which tends to be pretty linear, or even cycling, where you're doing the same repetitive motion over and over again, racket sports tend to be pretty dynamic, multi-directional. Like you have to do lateral movements, diagonal, front and back. And again, if you're thinking about it from a neurological point of view, this works all these different parts of your brain and helps with your balance, your flexibility, and functional strength, especially as we get older. And then the last reason is racket sports tend to be fun. People who do it would agree on that. The craze now is pickleball, right? A lot of people are getting into that, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's fun on top of the social connection you get to engage in. When something is fun, it makes it easier to stay consistent with it.
Exercise.
If it's fun, then you're much more likely to stick with it. And that builds in this higher likelihood of consistency just because it's fun.
I think my takeaway from this is it's kind of like a bike, depending on if you're going up an incline or not. You always try and take the hardest gear that you can handle. Is ultimately how you're going to get the most power output at the end of the day. Yeah, I think running or playing soccer is probably the best, but let's face this, most people aren't even the adoption. There's going to be a lot of drop off. So do the hardest thing that you can do easily for most people who are not hardcore fitness enthusiasts.
I'm probably a bit of a tennis snob. Refuse to pick up a pickleball paddle.
You guys think it's beneath you, right?
That being said, I think it is actually really good because I see a lot of people who otherwise don't have any background in racket sports picking it up. Those people that play tennis, they know that it's a tough sport. And if you didn't pick it up earlier in life, it's a really tough sport to master because it's very technical, a lot of technique involved, and it's a big court. There's a lot of running involved. So I think it's a good thing that there's something like pickleball. It's a lot more easily accessible. The barrier to entry is lower in terms of promoting health for the general public. I think it is a good thing.
Let's face it, for myself, like in my 20s and 30s would play a lot of pickup basketball, but there's a point where most people drop off in their 40s. You don't see anybody in their 50s other than the big grandpa. So it's
Yeah.
just constant decline, but you got to do something.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked about racket sports a bit. The next highest scoring activity was swimming. Swimming is a good sport because it's a combination of you got your cardiovascular component to it. It uses a lot of different muscle groups. And it's one of the most low impact joint friendly sports out there.
The one thing that I think like swimming, because I don't like the beach, but
Mm.
it's like a high barrier to start it, right? Because you gotta change your clothes, you get wet, you gotta dry off. I think that's what makes it a little bit like there's a barrier.
Yeah, not everyone has access to a pool. For some people, there is that socioeconomic barrier. It's not everyone has access to a pool where you can actually do lap swimming. I'm not talking about just dipping in the pool and having fun. Being able to have access to the pool or a lake or part of the ocean that you can actually swim a decent distance. Not everyone has that.
What do you do for like most people will run a mile? What's the
Mm.
equivalent swimming? Like swim for 15 minutes constantly? And is there some distance that you shoot for? If the equivalent of a mile?
That's a good question. I'm relatively new to swimming. I took beginner lessons a couple years ago. I'm about to do my first half Ironman, but the swimming will definitely be a challenge. I remember starting off just doing one length of the pool. I was so out of breath. I was
Yeah.
gasping for air.
It takes a minute, right?
It took me
Yeah.
a really long time just to get from one end to the other, and I was gassed. And my cardiovascular system is a running. It's not bad, but knew I was doing something very wrong if I was completely out of breath just getting to the other side of the pool. I realized that swimming is a really technical sport. It's not one of those sports where if you just push harder and try harder, you get better. There's so much technique involved. Yeah. And I've had to spend a lot of time seeking help and getting some coaching to help with my techniques so that I'm not completely gassed just going one or two lengths of
Yeah.
the pool.
So maybe like 2 laps take you 5 minutes.
And I think something like 100 meters, my goal is to consistently do under 2 minutes on a longer swim. So I'm not quite there yet, but that's what I'm shooting for. I can get under 2 minutes right now if I'm doing just 100-meter reps, but to string together, let's say during a 200 or 400, that's quite difficult for me.
It reminds me of another water sport. You also
Mm.
have indoor rowing.
Yeah.
Some people like the CrossFit Games champion, Miko Salo, is from one of the most stoic people. He would
Yeah.
be known for doing indoor rowing in his closet by himself, which kind of proves the point I think that we're making here with a lot of
Yeah.
this stuff.
Swimming is generally not thought of as a social sport, but despite the lack of social component, all the other things about swimming help propel this to number 2 on the list. That tells you how good it is for the body, right?
Despite it being a loner activity.
Yeah, yeah. So we talked about it involves like basically your whole body. It also involves breath control and which helps with your lung health, right? Because you have to have good breath control when you're breathing in the water. You can't breathe like you normally do when you're running or cycling. You generally have to exhale and inhale much more slowly. This in itself is actually really good for your cardiovascular system. And it also has this effect of actually being a good stress reliever because when you slow down your breathing, and then also something just about being in the water is very calming and relaxing. So even though you're working hard, potentially, it's overall it has very beneficial effects for your body's system. Next on the list, we talked about aerobics, group classes, even dance classes. Right? These tend to be group activities, right? If we revisit this theme of the importance of having social connections, a social outlet, we can understand why this is so effective. It helps bring people out because you're much more likely to stick with something if you're in a group with people that you like. You might also find that this is an automatic built-in accountability group, right? You have these accountability partners. If you're in a class or if you're part of a dance group, right? Working towards like a end of season show, for example. So all these things make it fun and help you to keep going back. So it doesn't feel like you're going for exercise because it's fun. You actually do want to go. Similar to tennis in some ways. When you're moving around, you're working different muscle groups, you're working your cardiovascular system, whether it's aerobics or dance, involves a lot of coordination and requires you to use your brain, like having to learn a series of moves, memorize them, different movement patterns. Like all this stuff is really good for the brain, especially as we get older. And also, if this is not something that you normally do, right? When you go out of your comfort zone and do new movement patterns, that's really beneficial for your brain. And that in itself will probably help you live long. Yeah. And then being part of a like a aerobics class or a dance class, there's usually music involved. It's usually a fun, upbeat environment. That in itself is good for your emotional health, good for your cortisol levels, helps your body release happy hormones like endorphins. And then we know the happier people tend to live longer.
Something that comes to mind is like Zumba, right? It hits all those marks. But
Yeah.
it seems like people who do Zumba, they tend to fade out of it because there's never any increased score. There's no competition maybe that keeps them there. I don't know. But that's just like
Yeah.
a feeling I get.
I've never done Zumba, but I could see how that could happen. I think having that variety is important to a lot of people.
Yeah.
When something
And
gets too repetitive, then that interest is probably going to start to wane.
yeah.
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about myself here. We were talking about group classes. And one thing I've recently started doing is going out of my comfort zone and learning some dance, right? Whether it's swing dancing or I'm actually in a hip hop class right now, something totally outside my comfort
Yeah.
zone.
Divorce or something? Like, what is making you do this?
Refer back to the episode on midlife crisis.
Good for you.
But yeah, I'm probably the worst in the class. I think this is beneficial. Just
Yeah.
don't
That
take
by
yourself
yourself or
with my wife and a couple friends. Yeah. So again, helping to keep each other accountable because for the hip hop class, I've never done anything like this. And at the end of the season, we put on a show, right? I remember after the first class or two, I'm thinking, gosh, this is not for me. This is so hard for me. I'm thinking of maybe not going back, but going with friends is very helpful because you can help keep each other accountable and like the people with the experience can help you out. What we're talking about here, it's that social component. It's a lot funner to do something in a group and it just
yeah.
keep going
I think
back and
that's a
back.
gym did like a Olympic weightlifting class. And I could have the idea of, oh, I've been doing CrossFit for like over 15 years now. I know this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I eat. I don't need a dietitian or
Yeah.
I drive. I don't need people to teach me how to drive.
Yeah.
Is some attitude people have, but sometimes it's cool to pay a couple $100 and do a quick lesson and learn something
Totally.
new.
Yeah. So it's been fun, I think. And just like learning like new movement patterns and things that just like totally outside one's comfort zone. It's very challenging, but now I have a lot of respect for people who do dance, no matter what the genre is, right? Whether it's like jazz or contemporary or hip hop. It's wow, like this actually see what goes into it. And some of these people are like just tremendously talented and really athletic.
Yeah, similar along those lines, your local gymnastics gym not only teaches the young kids, a lot of them have an adults time where you can go and just bounce on the equipment, and they'll usually have some type of more tailored towards older adults as a way to just do something different too.
Yeah, totally. I'm really appreciating more and more just how important it is to always try new things. Don't just stick with what you're good at, but maybe identify things you're actually really bad at. Maybe go out of your way to pick those things to try out.
Not everybody does that, Paul. Some people
Yeah.
only like to do things that they're good at.
Good idea.
But yeah, just give me some ideas. And then the swimming,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that's where you get a little bit of social component.
You're absolutely right. That was actually something that we do in our local swim club. We probably spend more time in the sauna and hot tub afterwards than we do swimming.
Yeah, that's what golfing is, right? It's supposed to be a social
Yeah.
sport. I actually thought about I'm gonna build a new gym at my house, but maybe get like a float tank or like a plunge tank too, a homemade one, and
Well,
go around.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
And my wife and I are going to try that out this weekend. Go to
yeah.
float tank and float like otters.
Not the otter. I've done that one too. That's nice
Yeah.
and relaxing. The
Yeah.
plunge tank, the ice.
The cold plunge.
Yeah,
We've done that too, alternating between the cold plunge and
yeah.
the sauna. Yeah, that's good.
But I'm thinking about doing like it's kind of like a country club, but it's on the beach. Normally, I don't like because the parking, the shower, right? So I'm gonna spend some money on this country club on the beach. It's kind of like a canoe club, but
Yeah.
I'm not a swimmer. You look at all the people swimming in the ocean; they're all like the most unfit people. And if I can combo it, getting a cheeseburger after at the beach club, then
Yeah.
that's how I'm gonna incentivize myself to do it, I guess. More importantly, my kid can play at the beach. I think that was the main reason too. If there's some way you can combo these types of activities with some social component, make you addicted to go back for more. That's hopefully what we've inspired people here. to
Yeah,
do a little bit.
totally. And you actually hit on one of the other reasons I like to exercise, which is I really like to eat. I feel less bad about myself if I pig out on snacks after I've done a lot of exercise. Rounding out this list here is cycling, which again, it's good for your cardiovascular endurance. It's a pretty low impact activity, pretty accessible, right? It's not difficult to find a bike and ride it. You can go for a leisurely ride, but you can also push it pretty hard if you want to. It's also good for building lower body strength, balance, stamina, and all of this stuff helps support healthy aging and mobility. All right, so we're going to talk about things like weightlifting and CrossFit. In this British Journal of Sports Medicine study, they didn't look specifically at weightlifting and CrossFit. They only looked at the most common activities that people did. However, there's been a lot of other studies that have been done, and these show a clear benefit of strength training. For example, in a 2022 meta analysis published in the same journal, they showed that 30 to 60 minutes of strength training per week was associated with a 10 to 20% reduction in all cause mortality, lower risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Numbers based on just 30 to 60 minutes of strength training per week. Other studies have shown that when you do some strength training at least twice a week, it's associated with almost 50% lower risk of death. Again, these are pretty staggering numbers, right? So if you want bang for your buck, doing some weights at least twice a week is a pretty good use of your time.
So what's the prescription here that it's saying? Lift weights a couple days a week.
I don't,
Is it sane or?
yeah, I think for most people, it might be tough to do everything, right? But the key takeaway is just stay active, right? We know that strength training, weightlifting, they're good. I mean, if you find it boring just to be lifting weights, then the other activities on the list we started with, like group aerobics, swimming, cycling, racket sports, you're going to get really good bang for your buck in those areas. Yeah. Obviously, if you're retired, have a lot of time, you could probably get in at least 2, 3 weight sessions a week in addition to other activities, right? Whether it's tennis, cycling, swimming. But not everyone has that luxury of time with jobs and other obligations. Right? So then a lot of people were asking how much exercise is enough for longevity. Going back to this original study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, they put out this guideline, which is that if you do at least 150 minutes of what's considered moderate intensity exercise per week, that's going to be associated with, like significantly lower risk of death, or at least 75 minutes a week of something more vigorous. So 75 minutes a week, not a lot if you think about it. But if it's vigorous, you get a lot of health benefits, right? So again, 75 minutes of vigorous activity or 150 minutes of something more moderate or some combination thereof. So again, we're
Yeah,
not
so
talking about something really time intensive.
yeah, to me that's like a CrossFit workout.
I would consider CrossFit to be in that vigorous category.
Whereas like moderate is your 8 to 12 minute mile pace. 150 minutes is a lot easier to hit because you can
Mhm.
rack off 60 minutes here or there at the vigorous rate. Even 10, 12 minutes is difficult.
Correct. Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people would probably find that doing 150 minutes, let's say like a racket sport, is that time will probably pass by a lot quicker than 75 minutes of doing really intense exercise in a CrossFit class for most people. Right?
Uh,
For most people.
yeah. But then there's like this culture of get your 5,000 or 10,000 steps in. To me, that's not moderate intensity in this 150 minutes. That's not on this chart, right?
Yeah.
So where are you at with that?
Yeah, I think that 10,000 steps, it's a pretty arbitrary number. I'm not sure how much research there is to back that up. So obviously, like in the Western world, there's a lot of sedentary people out there. Right? Given the option of taking more steps or less steps, you want to be doing more steps, especially if that is your primary source of physical activity.
Paul's saying it's not enough, guys. If you could do. To wrap this up, like my whole take on this is just like your standard, right? If you have a standard where you're going to do the bare minimum 5,000 steps, that's all you can do. This is where you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, what is my standard? Am I going to
Yeah.
do my 12 minutes of very vigorous activity religiously 5 times a day to do this? That might be better than tennis player who can dream walk through a pickleball game for a couple hours. That's obviously not going to be too
Right.
much for them.
Exactly. This also makes me think of the importance of who do you choose to associate with, right? Whether it's in the realm of investing, professional development, or like self improvement. A lot of times we find the most benefit by finding like minded people or finding maybe people who are a little bit better than us or people that we aspire to be. I think similarly, when it comes to exercise and health, we can do the same. We can look for clubs or groups of people that we might want to emulate, people that can help keep each other accountable. You motivate each other, just like in any other domain.
Yeah. You still running with that Olympian? She thinks you guys are too slow for
I'm
her.
not sure I ever ran with her
You started
in
you
her
started and
vicinity. Yeah.
stretched with each other and she
Yeah.
enough you
Basically.
guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still part of that running group. Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions or comments, feel free to leave it on our YouTube channel. Otherwise, yeah, get out there, make things happen, have fun doing it. And Lane and I will see you in the next episode.
See you next time. Bye.